Hello, my name's Rob and I'm part of the clergy team at the Portishead Church of England. It's really lovely to have you with me, or to be with you today. It's a beautiful day, and on a beautiful day like today where it's actually pretty warm, one of the places I'd love to be is sitting by a little stream, perhaps on Exmoor, just one of those lovely places where you can hear the soft tinkle of water over the rocks as it runs down towards the sea. Just lovely. Smell the bracken, hear the sheep. What a beautiful scene that would be. And there is little more idyllic than an Exmoor stream. But in the summer of 1952, it was an extraordinarily wet beginning to August, and there'd been an unprecedented amount of rain by August the 15th, and the moor was waterlogged, and the streams that flow off it, particularly the East and West Lynn rivers, were really full to overflowing. And in the night of the 15th, as the waters swept off the moor, they carried with them some tree stumps and other detritus, and one by one the bridges that crossed the river got blocked, and the water backed off behind them. And then one by one those dams burst, and the waters came rushing down the valley. And poor Lynmouth, there at the mouth of the Lynn, where the river meets the sea, was absolutely decimated by some really horrendous floods, which a number of people died, and a lovely idyllic seaside fishing port and resort was almost destroyed. It's easy to forget, sitting by a flowing, gentle stream, just what the potential force of water can be, and what can happen if floods occur. I'm going to read some words that talk a little bit about that. It's some words that Jesus spoke. They come from Matthew 7, and it's a story that will be very familiar to you, a little parable that Jesus told, and probably of all the things that Jesus said, this one perhaps takes us back to Sunday school and reminds us of a song, and it's the parable of the two builders, and it goes like this. It's Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 to 27. Jesus said, "Everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." It is probably a parable that we know really, really well, a story that Jesus told that we've become really familiar with it, and we can't hear it without imagining cartoon builders building their houses, one on a rock and one on the sand. But what's actually Jesus talking about? He's talking about wisdom and foolishness. And what's the difference between the wise and the foolish? Well, it's about where they build, and whether they build on rock or whether they build on sand. And we may say, oh, okay, I know what that's about. That's about faith. It's about what we believe. But it's interesting, because that's not what Jesus says here. He says, if anyone builds on these words that I've spoken, and acts on them, it's about our behavior. It's about what we do. And which words is Jesus speaking about? Well, he's speaking about the words of the Sermon on the Mount. Very well-known passage that of Jesus' words that occurs between Matthew 5 and Matthew 7. And the story we've just heard comes right at the end of that. So Jesus is looking back over those 3 chapters and saying, this is really important. If you build your life on these words, if you act on them, well, that is building on rock. Very often people will say, well, I'm not so sure about Jesus being God's son, I'm sure about his divinity, but I'm sure he was a good moral teacher. And they'll often go to the Sermon on the Mount for that. Here we have Jesus challenging us to live differently. But if we read the Sermon on the Mount, and I do encourage you to do that, it's just 3 chapters. Read Matthew 5 to 7. These words are really, really radical. This is Jesus inviting us into a very different way of being, a way where we are radically generous with our time and with our possessions, where we forgive those who do wrong to us, where we're faithful to those whom we love and who love us, where we seek to live in a radically, radically different way. Not at all easy. And to an extent that would leave many perhaps saying, well, it's all very well, but it's not really very realistic, is it? But I think Jesus would beg to differ. And for me, I think this is one of the reasons why the church is important. Because the church is there not to encourage us to be nice. I mean, niceness is good. But the church is there to encourage us to live this radical path that Jesus invites us into. This way that he says this is what it means to build on rock. Because, as somebody once said, Jesus wasn't crucified for saying or doing things that made sense to everybody. Jesus came and invited those who follow him to take up their cross, to embark on a completely different way of life, a really challenging one. I find it challenging. And yet, if we believe the words that Jesus spoke, this is a way that leads to life. This is about wisdom. This is about living in a way that makes ultimate sense. Because to live this way is to build our lives on the rock that is Jesus. I wonder how we can help one another to do that better. May God bless you.